Hello, How to Build Green listeners. Your host, Adam Fries here. I'm super honored today to have another very special guest on with us today, Clarke Snell. Clarke is a researcher, designer, and author. He specializes in high-performance residential building systems and has extensive experience in both construction as a builder, designer, and as a principal architect at a hyper-green residential design and consulting firm. His area of focus has been research, development, and low carbon footprint building systems. Initially, his focus was on-site harvested or recycled materials, but in recent years, he has been looking at industrial materials and most notably, lowering the environmental footprint of concrete. With a team at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, he has been working to integrate a new material, geopolymer cement concrete, into an innovative building envelope system that utilizes existing precast concrete technology. Welcome to the show, Clarke.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right, Clarke, we need to fill in the blanks a little bit from the intro. You've been into building green or hyper green for many years now. Can you talk a little bit about your journey that brought you to where you are today, and how did you become passionate about sustainable building?
Oh man. Well, it's funny. I remember. I have a really early memory of having a environmental poster in my room, like when I was 8 years old. It was a tree. It was some ecology poster. So for some reason, I've always just had this as a topic in my mind, even as a kid. But how I got into building specifically, I decided at some point that I wanted to have a nice house, have a house that I felt sort of fit my values. And as I was looking around at housing and started learning about it, I just felt like, well, I didn't see anything that seemed to, be common sense, built with common sense in terms of how you would do that. So I started thinking that I'll build my own house. And that's what started the whole thing going. I just then I became a carpenter, and I did a lot of research, and I eventually built that house. But to do that, I had to move out to the country in North Carolina, where there was gravity-fed spring water and sun and a good growing season. And it was basically a vision quest. And when I was done with that, what do? You've spent 10 years, and so I decided, and I was liberal arts background, so I decided to write a book. And so that's how I got into the publishing end of it, and it's kind of gone from there.
So when talking about green, natural, or sustainable building, these terms can have radical different meanings to different people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define these concepts, Clarke?
Green, natural, sustainable? Well, first of all, yeah, again, like you said, I've been doing this a long time, and the first thing you do is you get term overload. I'm really tired of all these terms. They're really only tools, but I'll give it a shot. To me, sustainable is basically it's just doing something in a way you can repeat it. And it turns out as you try to do that with your life, you realize you have to be part of a system that is self-regenerating. Right? So the planet is a sustainable system. I think nobody would disagree with that. And so for some reason, it turns out that humans are the one component of that system that doesn't seem to be able to keep that going. So when we do things, we have to find some way to connect back with that cycle of self-regenerating activity. So that's sustainability to me. Green, I don't know. I mean, my first book is called Building Green, and my second book is called Building Green. The reason it's called Building Green is because the publisher said you got to call this green. I didn't have any green in there in the first place. It really should be probably blue building. It's a blue planet, right? So I just think that's a marketing term. I got no problem with it, but it's not really meaningful to me. Natural is something I really have trouble with. I mean, plutonium is natural, so I've never liked that term. I think it's natural foods. I think that's completely marketing. And can end up being a smokescreen. I don't mean that people that are into natural building are doing that. I just mean that it's something that I feel gets in the way. We'll maybe talk about it more, but a natural building can be very unhealthy. I mean, a building that's being marketed as natural. Natural tends to be focusing on materials, and materials really, when you get down to it, are a very small part of what makes up a building, what makes a building, to me, sustainable or not. So anyway, also I'm a geek, so these terms, you start talking about them, I get in the weeds pretty quickly. I had a friend call me the other day and say, "What's the best kind of house to build if I want to be green and sustainable?" And they were very frustrated that I would not answer that question, because that's an impossible question to answer. But people really want you to answer it, and they want you to use those terms. Well, natural is this. It's just the more you do this, the more you realize that is not the direction to go, I think, in terms of the discussion.
Right on. So one of the basic things you talk about, Clarke, is site net zero, source net zero, and carbon neutral. Can you expand on these for us?
Sure. It's pretty simple. Site nets, so it's the idea that you have more of an effect than what you're doing on the site itself. And this is all about energy production. So site net zero means you're making all the energy on site with renewable energy, solar power, hydro, whatever. Source net zero would mean if you are grid tied, which most people would be. In other words, if you're making electricity and putting it onto the grid, then you have to take into consideration the inefficiencies of the grid, all the friction at the plant, and the various things that take away from what you're producing, and so you have to add that in. So that's like, let's say, really, if you're putting power onto the grid, you're really only putting only a third of what you're making is going to be used because of the inefficiency of the grid. So that's much more you have to make to get to that level. Carbon neutral then is saying, okay, if we actually want to make a project that is completely has no carbon associated with it, then we have to even produce more energy to put it on the grid to make up for all the the materials that were made, the carbon footprint on those, the energy footprint, or the embodied energy is what some people call it. The trucking, the lunches the truck drivers ate. It would be very complicated to try to really say this building has had no carbon footprint, and that's that third echelon that you're trying. That's more like a calculation. That's not something that's set in stone.
Sure. And so, in reading some of your material, you talk about, the carbon footprint of concrete. And so
Yeah.
this is your latest focus. Correct me if I'm wrong, Clarke. But tell us, what's the problem with concrete?
Well, it's funny. I mean, listening to that bio is hilarious because, I mean, for better or for worse, I'm always changing what I'm doing. And I think really my next goal is to just do one thing and really dial it in. I'm not working on concrete right now. I'm working on a flood-resistant, or actually a flood-proof, sustainable building for the solar decathlon. But so going back to that is a really cool thing that I'm involved in and hope to do more of. So basically, one thing I like about it is it goes back to the natural building thing. I'm basically considered a natural builder. I came out of that world. I've done straw bale, cob, cordwood, all that stuff once. Basically, I do everything once. But concrete is really in the natural building world seen as basically a devil. It's considered a horrible material, but really concrete's a wonderful material. The reason we use so much of it is because it is. It's a poured in place rock. It's been used for thousands of years, and it's stone. I mean, there really is nothing in concrete that's not natural. The problem with it is, first of all, we use just so much of it. It's according to things I've read, the second most used material by humans on the planet next to water. So we just pour tons and tons of concrete every year. So that's one thing. The second thing is that it's basically, to make concrete, you are burning rocks. You put limestone in a kiln, and you have to basically melt them. So it's very, very energy intensive. And in our situation, energy means carbon because we're burning fossil fuels. Again, fossil fuels are just naturally occurring carbon, but it's just been trapped in the ground for a long time. And when we burn it, we just release a lot more carbon too quickly, and it changes the environment. So if you're doing what I'm doing, and basically at some point in my career I decided, okay, what is the real goal here? And it was to try to have an impact on our environmental problems. And I think the biggest environmental problem is climate change, which comes down to carbon, which comes down to fossil fuels. So then you start looking around and you say, what's our biggest footprint? And concrete is huge. Just again, this is statistics and math. There's opinions about it, but let's say 7% of our worldwide carbon footprint comes from concrete every year. So if you could take concrete out of the equation, just with one fell swoop, you could get rid of 7% of our carbon footprint. So that's how I got into really thinking about concrete. What was different about this concrete that we were working, the geopolymer cement concrete, is it looks basically the same. It feels the same, probably tastes the same, but the chemical process by which it becomes hard is completely different than Portland cement concrete. And basically, again, there's a debate as to exactly how much, but anywhere from 70 to 90%, some people say, reduction in carbon footprint when you use geopolymer cement as opposed to Portland cement to make concrete. So that's how I got involved in that.
Tell us more about the geopolymers. What is that? What actually is that, and what is it replacing in concrete?
Okay, so again, so basically concrete is rocks that are held together with cement. And so so the rocks are the same in both of these. And rocks, I mean, quarries are not beautiful, but they're pretty low energy, and there's not a lot of embodied energy into getting rocks out of the ground. Portland cement is made, like I said, you take limestone. I mean, it's more complicated than this, but you burn it, and there's a huge amount of energy that goes in that production of that component, that cement. The geopolymer cement, which replaces Portland cement, is basically an aluminosilicate, which could be clay, it could be rice husks. In our case, we were using a byproduct of coal combustion, so basically something that's going into landfills or into, there was, while we were working on that project, one of the biggest fly ash leaks in history happened and went into a river and just was terrible environmental disaster. So we were saying, well, let's just take this stuff that we're already making in this incredibly dirty process, and put it into concrete, encapsulate it, and so we're taking a waste product out of the waste stream, putting it into concrete, and then you take, so that's the aluminosilicate part, and then there's just a couple of reagents that if you mix them with this aluminosilicate and you apply some heat, they become hard, and there's a whole chemical process of that, but they have very similar properties to Portland cement concrete.
And so explain to us more about the hydronic nature of these wall systems that you were working on, and what they really do, what they really mean.
Okay, well, so that's a separate issue. So the first thing we just talked about was that we were saying, let's try to fix concrete by making it have a low carbon footprint. And our approach to that was to use this other type of cement and reduce carbons X amount. So we did that. But then why would we use concrete in a building in the first place? And one reason is, it's incredibly strong. You can build very tall structures with it. But for me, what's interesting about concrete, so we're already using it as a structural material, but it is also a thermal material. It can hold a lot of heat energy. And really when it comes down to energy efficiency in a building is about manipulating temperature to a large degree. And so you're basically trying to create a different, there's a lot of other things to it, but one very basic thing you're trying to do is create a different temperature inside than there is outside. And we do that right now, but mostly in this country, by building very light buildings that have light, fluffy insulation in a sort of a cocoon around the interior space, and then we create a temperature inside, and then we try to prevent that heat from moving to the outside. If you apply a mass material to that, in other words, you put something that has a lot of mass inside the insulation, then you can much more easily create a stable temperature, because that mass can then take on and give off heat. So you can, let's say, for example, in a passive solar building, you have some sun coming through a southern glass opening in the winter, when it's low, and it's heating up the room. Well, if you have a bunch of mass in that room, that heat can be stored through the day, and therefore not heat the air, and then when the sun goes down at night and the temperature drops outside, that mass can then let that heat back out, right? So you're creating sort of a flywheel of temperature that maintains the interior temperature at a desired level, passively. In other words, you're not using machinery to do that, and that's our goal, right? So the machinery means fuels, which means carbon footprint. So the more we can do things passively, the better it is as far as energy efficiency. So the whole point then of using concrete in the context we're talking about is try to create a thermal battery inside a building that can store energy. So then you were asking about hydronics. So that's the first thing. We're using the concrete. So we have this better concrete we're using, and then we're using it to try to store heat. What the hydronics do is that's a way for us to put heat in and take it out. So you basically, hydronics is simply a way of, in this case, it's basically a pipe with a fluid in it, and the fluid is moving heat in and out of the wall. So you can either use a fuel and heat up water and pump it through the walls to heat up the wall, or what we were doing in that case was we had heat exchangers on the roof that passively were collecting heat from the sun, and then at night that was being pumped into the walls, or at any time when the computer said it was the right time. We're just using a little bit of pump energy to pump that heat through the walls, and then the concrete would soak it up.
And so, is this what you're terming embedded hydronics when I read that term?
Yes, the hydronics are embedded in the concrete, and it's just a conduit to move heat in and out, heat energy or energy in and out of the wall, or wherever the hydronics are.
And so when I look at some of the videos on your website, Clarke, it shows it's a paneled system that what appears to be the panels are shipped to the site, and just kind of goes together like a puzzle, right? So is that the idea too? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Is that the idea as well, is to have these are factory built, these are shipped to the site, You have higher efficiencies because it's built in a factory, minus the shipping, right, to the site. Um, or what is the thought, or what was the thought in designing these panels from a practical standpoint on a if the thought was for a mass production, how did that look like in the real world? Does that
Well,
make
yeah,
sense?
so the whole point, oh, totally. The whole point is to use existing infrastructure, right? So
Okay.
we didn't invent that wall system. We added to it and we tweaked it to where it was an energy efficient wall system. Right now, most concrete panels are just concrete with no insulation. They're very inefficient, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But if what we did was we just used completely existing infrastructure in this very established industry, which is concrete production. There was a plant in Charlotte that we worked with. We used the only thing we did is we had to add a hot water heater so that we could pump water through the walls as they were curing. The one thing that's different about Portland cement, geopolymer from Portland cement, is you have to heat it as it's curing. So we used their forms, their beds, their trucks, everything exactly the same. We brought a heater. So for like $5,000, we turned a multi-million-dollar concrete plant into a green concrete plant as opposed to a typical one. And we have all their expertise and all the infrastructure in terms of the contractors understand it. They don't. There's really nothing different about the system except what's inside the wall.
So the idea, okay, so cool. So the idea was to, I don't know if change is the right word, but augment onto the existing infrastructure, meaning the existing concrete plants there, where I could go. I'm out of Durango, Colorado. I could go to my existing concrete plant, and with $5,000 of modifications or heaters or whatever, they're still the experts. I build the panels on their site. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, but that's an oversimplification. Simplification. That's what I said. But I was just simplifying. I mean, it's we could talk about this forever. Changing the construction industry is really difficult, and it's not that simple. Uh, Portland cement concrete turns out is much harder to work. You can't really trowel it. It's very gummy. Um, it takes longer to cure, so you screw up their production schedule. So you would really need a separate section of the plant. But we're very close now. See, and that's where let's go back to natural building.
Okay.
And again, I love natural building. I love Cobb. I love all that stuff. But getting to where you can actually, for example, there are many people who've been trained to do earth plastering at workshops around the country. I don't know a single, well, I really don't. I don't know anybody who earth plasters professionally and can give you a square foot price, who can walk in and tell you what how it's going to perform and guarantee it basically.
Yeah.
It's a hippie eco warrior thing to do. I'm a hippie eco warrior. I got no problem with it. But if we're trying to change, we're trying to make it. That's the cool thing about climate change. We all have to do it. It can't be just the rich people with their cool eco houses, and it can't just be the hippies out in the country like I was doing it. We have to. Everyone has to do it. And the cool thing about this concrete, as an experiment for me, I'm not saying it's the answer, was that once it was built and done, it didn't look any different. It didn't seem any different. It was just better. And that's I think what we have to do. We have to just make it like painless. And we have to it's like brain surgery. You don't go to a brain surgeon and say, I'm going to get involved with this. I want to tell you how to do it. You just want your brain fixed, right? I think it's the same thing with housing or buildings. We have to say, hey, this is the same building. This is the cost. You don't even have to know the fact that we just saved the world by you using this. That's been my approach, and it's been over a long period of time. So when I was involved in natural building, it's such a cool thing. People get excited about it, but it's really difficult to do
Mhm.
in the modern or the contemporary context, and it's expensive. Thatching is probably the most expensive roof system that you can build. Right? It's beautiful. I
Right.
don't know if it performs as well as some others, but who does it? Where do you get the thatch? Where do how do you actually do it in a way that's and so it used to be a peasant's approach, and now it's like a really, really high-end thing if you're practically really trying to do it in a way that's going to last. Right. So anyway, that's my whole thing right now. I've gone from sort of being the guy out in the country homesteading, doing it myself, to saying, okay, actually, this isn't. If it's just me by myself, this isn't going to solve the problem that I set out to solve. So, how do I be involved in the change? And being involved in the change is interfacing with the economy and with existing infrastructure and trying to make it so that everyone can do this. And I think to do that, you have to make it to where it's not a huge pain in the ass. Where it's something that just can be done, and that's the hard part. It's the fun, challenging part, but it's very difficult.
And so, how do those two? And so, from my own experience I relate to what you say as far as a plaster giving you an actual square foot cost on natural plasters. It's for the natural homes that I've built, and in my experience, plasters are the cost drivers of these organic natural homes with clays. They are. If you don't start prepping for them from day one,
Yep.
you'll get yourself in trouble fast. And the problem is, I know in this area is, the natural plaster that I use, he's got extensive experience, but he's retraining every project because there's not enough projects to keep an entire crew going one house after another. And so he trains a crew, retrains a crew every project. But so I can super relate to that. But and I also relate to how you're saying more getting a product such as this concrete polymer wall system that you don't know it's any different, and it's more of a mass production. It's more able to be mass produced and not more niche, if you will, with the clays. But in my mind, and I look at the whole picture, there's a place for them both, and it's not clear to me of the scale of both, and it seems to. So can you address that a little bit? How do these other building systems interplay with each other? I mean, how do you take that question, Clarke? Does that make
So
sense?
you mean like earth plaster versus geopolymer? How do those come together?
Exactly. What are the scope of each? I mean, do they both play a part in the future? Do
Okay,
they?
well, I think the way I'll answer that is maybe a sidetrack. To me, it's all about building science, right? I don't care what something is made out of. If it doesn't last, it's not of any value to me. And so if we can, and so natural builders, sometimes that I've known, tend to be a little woo-woo. They want to talk about the beauty, and that, again, a cob building is always about, this rounded corners, this, there's a spiritual feel to it, and I'm like, that's fine, but how is it going to perform? And how do you know how it's going to perform? Do you understand building science? And we live in a country. I can't, you're a carpenter if you have a hammer, and you're a contractor if you have a level, right? I mean, I learned coming up just working with people. That's great or whatever, but I mean, that's not going to get a quality building built. The way we need more training. We need more. I looked at Germany. I think Germany is a good example. Of course, I don't live in Germany. I did for 1 year, so maybe I'm fantasizing about it. But at least I think there that you start with a design that's very building science based, and that somehow that's carried through the construction process, which means the people building it understand what they're doing and why. If your insulator doesn't understand why they're insulating, or if your person who is in charge of doing what the designer is considering to be the air barrier does not understand air tightness, all your cool thoughts and designs and hopes and carbon neutrality just goes down the drain. Those have to go together. So what I'm talking about is, yeah, if we want to do a natural building, like you said, then it has to. I mean, a building using those materials, the people building it have to understand the building science and how is moisture being dealt with in terms of the wall system. How is air tightness being dealt with? Liquid moisture, water vapor, sun, all those things have to be considered and understood. And I think that's what's really the problem. I think that in this country, architects are the worst.
Sure.
They don't even understand that concrete is an insulation and things like that. I mean, so it's a matter of education to me. And then us all becoming loving, working as one big team where we, it's not like, the builders hate the architects and the architects hate the builders and all. It's just we got to work together and have a system that from design to finish is integrated.
And so how do we do that, Clarke? That was a question in my mind even prior to the interview. Contractors, architects, the status quo sure is easy. Change sure is hard, even though it's not an option at this point. So how do we break out of the status quo? How do we train people? How do we create this change in the minds of builders, of architects, that there is a better way and it doesn't have to cost more, does it?
I don't know. I mean, you're just talking to such an idealist, and I'm really working on it. I'm trying to be a recovered idealist, but I don't know that. I mean, one thing I did recently is I went back to architecture school, and I got a master's in architecture for the very naive reason that I thought I was going to have some sort of effect on architectural education. And of course, I got in there, and it was a completely different world, and I just had to figure out what the hell they were talking about and why they cared about it. And then I learned a lot about the history of architecture and why architectural education is in the state it's in, or is the way it is. But the idea that little me can come in there and talk to, a very entrenched, thousands of years old educational approach and say we need to do something differently. I don't know how you accomplish that. I mean, maybe live to be 200. I mean, I don't know. But I mean, basically just trying. So I think that I guess the way is people like you and me, if we think this is something that's important, that whoever we touch, we try to find, where the problem exists, where the sort of disjoint in the communication, and apply it. Like we're saying, I mean, one thing about, and it's fun to be somebody like me and like you, I think, the same way that does know about the construction side of it and know how hard it is. Construction is really, really hard work, and it's because you're out there, it's repetitive, it's dangerous, it's hot or cold, but then you're doing something that's critical. You're on a roof and it's cold, and if you don't do it right, then you have ruined that building. I mean, I see buildings all the time that just somebody put the flashing on wrong. They probably just were cold as shit up there, or maybe they didn't understand. But so we have to find a way to where everyone knows what's going on, and it's complicated. I think there's got to be education, but I think it also has to be that maybe it does come down to the client on some level, asking for people that they know are qualified. I've thought a lot about it, but I don't have an answer. I just keep trying, and like I said, what happens with me is I just try different things, and I keep kind of meandering around with different projects. And the next thing for me, I think, is to either get involved with a firm or start one where we just do one thing, where it's no more because it really, to me, comes down to construction detailing. You have to have very exacting construction detailing to make it not only work from a building science standpoint, but from a cost standpoint, and just a success on all levels, because you have to know what you're doing before you start building, and so often we don't. We're standing there going, how are we going to do this corner or whatever,
Right.
or there's this new little innovation that we decided was cute and we put it in there, and it makes a bunch of other things fly off the handle. So I'm ready. I think that's what there are certain systems in place that are really helping with that. Where for example, I'm a passive house consultant. One reason I'm involved in that, passive house is an energy standard out of Germany that's maybe the most rigorous in the world. But what it really is a design tool. There's a piece of software that comes with the package. I mean, you get certified as to whether or not you have the level of energy usage that they require. But really what it is, it's a way of helping you decide how do you design a building where the windows and the walls and the mechanical system all work together, and they force you to think about thermal bridges and a bunch of other issues that you could just ignore and you can't see. You can look at two buildings and they look exactly the same and they'll perform completely differently, right?
Sure. Clark, do you have a favorite building style for you? If you could live in any home you wanted to,
Yeah.
what would you live in? What feels the best to you? I'm talking, and now I'm even more going more intangibles because they all feel so different from you know, a, a cob house, straw bale house, adobe house. They just have a different feeling, and you can see it on people's faces when they walk into these different structures. What's your favorite?
Yeah, I don't have a favorite because I think it's for me a lot more complicated. I know what you're talking about, and I know that, I mean, I built a cob cottage for that book we wrote, Building Green, and I've never, everyone walks into it and they get this little gasp. It's tiny. It's 110 square feet. It's very beautiful. But for me, I have to go beyond that. And to me, so I have a complex way of looking at this. First of all, I don't think that you can have the same house through your entire life. I think that a young person's house is different than an old person's house. A single person's house is different than a family's house. So to me, it's not really about the materials. It's about whether or not it fits the occupant. For me personally, what fits is a building that at the end of the day, I can sit down and say, you know what, everything is done. I want something that's as self-sustainable as possible. In other words, it's going to be making power. There's going to be some food production. There's going to be very low energy usage. It's going to be very easy to live in and complete, pretty small, have a lot of outdoor space. But in the end of the day, it's not like there's 40 acres to mow. There's not a lot of stuff undone because the building is too big for me. So those are the ways I think about buildings now. Not so much as in terms of the materials. I think we can build with pretty much. I think you could make a stick frame building that's just as beautiful as a cob building, and with the same aesthetic. You can round the corners with plastering. You can do whatever you want to do in terms of how you want it to look. But to me, it's much more about how it performs both from an energy standpoint and from the people living in it, how they feel using it, not just walking into it. So
How
it's
should
typical. Not a straight up forward answer, but that's the best I can do.
Right. No, good, good, good. So, and how would it makes me think of also how we deal with Many Americans have such long commutes.
Mm.
We have rural and suburban homes. How should we think about urban versus rural when thinking sustainability, however you want to term it,
Yeah.
reducing our energy output?
Man, these are great questions. You're good at this. You hit on it, really. I mean, so, and again, back to my own life, I um, decided at one point that I wanted to live in the country. And the reason I did that is, as I said, I want to have more control over my daily life. I want to have a sustainable lifestyle as much as possible. I want to be able to be at home one day and say, you know what, if I stay home today, I'm not having any impact, any negative impact. So I did that, and I went through a lot of hassles to move to the country and build a house and get set up. And I learned a huge amount of things. You need more stuff in the country. You need more tools. You need a chainsaw and a four-wheel drive truck and a really good snow shovel or whatever. And you need a way of making a living, which often in the country means driving, 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 driving. So right now I'm living in Hoboken, New Jersey. I moved here to work on a project for a year. This Hoboken's right across the Hudson from New York City. I walk or ride my bike everywhere. Everything I need is right here. I am so much more relaxed. I mean, I'm always stressed out of my work because it's too crazy, but it's a much better lifestyle. Now, what's behind the scenes? There's trucks driving in every day bringing me what I need. I don't know the equation. People say, one thing is I think the single-family home is really a mistake. A small building with a bunch of surface area to the outside is going to be very inefficient. You need buildings clustered together so they can share heat or cool or whatever it is you're producing. And from a design standpoint, it's much more interesting to try to create privacy, for example, in a multifamily house than just some house sitting out in the country. So right now, I'm much more headed back toward urban and finding a way to do all the fun stuff in an urban environment as opposed to way out in the country. Now, in the country, if you're farming, that's great, or if you do have some sort of insular way of living where you do stay there a lot, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I just, in my own trajectory, I'm feeling like that the city is where the people are, right? It's where the discussion's going on. It doesn't matter where you do it, really. You need water, sun, food, and that's everywhere.
So, and you touched on a little bit about energy, and so what's the future of energy production? Maybe it's regional specific, but what's the future of energy production? However you take that question.
Okay. Well, we have to go back to passive house for that, and whatever. Passive house is just a tool. The first thing we have to do is reduce what we're using, right? And that in terms of buildings, and buildings, again, there's statistics. I mean, let's say it's close to half of our energy footprint is from our buildings. So we just have to make better buildings, and that's really a simple engineering question, right? You just build something that doesn't lose energy through its envelope as quickly. You build something that is ergonomically more efficient, that's closer to where people need to be. This idea of living, even because it happens all the time in the city, why aren't we living where we work? I don't understand that. It's just like everybody who's living over there and driving here, let's just switch places. It's just like pretty simple. Conceptually, it's really simple. So that's the first thing, is we have to just reduce our usage. And then once you do that, then it's fun because we can solve the problem, I think, with solar energy or hydro or something that has yet to be discovered. Tesla's always doing crazy stuff. It seems like every day they're developing something new that somebody else hadn't thought of in terms of a level of efficiency. So I think the technical side of it is solvable, but not the consumption side. We just are so profligate in our energy and material use. I can't believe the amount of trash that we produce. I'm building a prototype, or I'm involved in building and designing a hyper efficient prototype building. We still have had 2 dumpster loads of trash that were generated on the project, right? That's bad.
Yeah, that's what when you touch on that, my own personal experiences. I've traveled some and into third world countries and stuff, and I always get back here in the U.S. and think, damn, we're so entitled.
Yeah.
We're so entitled. We think it's a born right to consume, or I have 2 little boys and my wife, and we recycle as much as possible. We generate 1 little bag of trash a week. And then our neighbors, just a couple of 2, an elderly couple, they can fill their entire big bin trash can with probably 5 bags. I mean,
Right.
just the comparison. I'm not being critical of them at all when I say that. It's just as a comparison, Uh,
Well, I think the thing with that too is that, you know, in some ways, I don't know. I mean, you got to dial in. I don't know. I think recycling right now, in some ways, um, is a conceptual salve. I don't know how much of that stuff is actually being recycled. I know that, like, out in the country where I was living, it's expensive to drive plastic around. So if they couldn't get a good price for it, or if the plastic's too light, they won't really recycle it. And so I don't know how much of that we're putting in recycling bins is actually being recycled. So I think really, if we're talking about, like, you're asking me what I think the answer is that we have to all be more vigilant and try to get into the weeds of it all. Like, is this stuff actually being recycled? Let's find out. What's the actual effect I'm having? And that's difficult, and it takes effort, and we're all busy. So it really comes down to, I think we have to change our perspective and see it as fun. I mean, to me, problem solving is a fun thing to do, and this is actually pretty simple, right? I mean, it's like, really, it's just reducing. It's something that any engineer should want to do, and really any person who's spending any money, right? Don't we just want to be? Isn't it better to be simpler? Isn't it better to have more time? That wouldn't I mean, at least me, I can't imagine really somebody preferring to drive over walking. Now I know that'd be a big debate. Some people do, but I mean, I don't know. At least driving stresses me out. I mean, it just does. Okay, that was an opinion right there, but I think the rest of that's fairly fair.
Awesome.
So what I'm trying to say, okay, this is a big thing for me, is that it's not simple. And I think that we're a country. You say that we're spoiled. We're spoiled because the stuff is cheap. I can't believe you can throw away a plastic bottle. That's an amazing technical feat to make a bottle, and we throw it away after one. I mean, these tiny ones, it's just because it's too cheap. So it's economics. It's our whole setup, right? It needs to be changed.
Sure.
Unfortunately. No, but what I was trying to put it positively, it's like, it's not like it's a bad thing. It's not like everything we would do I think would make our lives better. And there's the only people really that would lose out from any stuff that I think about would be like Exxon, and Exxon shouldn't lose out. They've got a ton of money. They should just switch over to something that's,
sure,
with our needs, right? So I think it's a win-win.
So, Clarke, do you think sustainable building, or sustainability in general, not just building, do you think it's an ethical, moral, or spiritual issue?
Oh my God! I used to be a philosophy. To me, it's an emotional issue because okay, let's get philosophical. You brought those terms. I mean, the sun's going to burn out eventually. I don't understand how we're actually here. The universe couldn't have started, but it had to start sometime. There's just, like, it's way beyond my pay grade to understand any of that. But I live here, and it's an incredibly beautiful place. I mean, just the way it all works, and you pick up anything, and if you really think about it, your brain would explode. How I was looking at a clamshell last night after eating a clam, and it was so structurally strong, and it had a little hinge on it, and you're just like, whoa, that's where we live. And the fact that we are not living in sync with it just hurts me on a very emotional level. And I'm just like, why would we do that? I know that nobody wants to do that, and I don't want to. This idea that is so hilarious to me, like we're going to go off into space someplace where there's nothing we need. Everything we need is here. We're supposed to go off into space and create some kind of paradise? No, actually, the only chance we've got is here. I mean, again, I'm sort of a logical, common sense person. That's what makes sense to me. So I'm like a hillbilly. I'm just like, come on, it's a cool place to live. Let's have fun and live here, just like any rabbit or bee. They don't have any problems doing what the greatest minds, human minds in the world are trying to accomplish. Everything else can do it effortlessly. That bugs me. Right. I think it's like embarrassing for our team. We need to. And the thing is too, if we don't figure it out, we will not survive. I mean, that's pretty obvious. The roaches or something will live on, but we won't.
And so that brings me to the last question, Clarke, and you just hit on it right there as far as survival. Even when I look at visionaries such as yourself, I think to myself, will this be enough? Clarke, can we implement change fast enough? How do you feel about this? How are we doing? Are we going to make it? Are we going to do it in time? What does that mean?
Man, see, this is like, are we drinking beers or are we like having a podcast? Because it's a schizophrenic thing. No, I think there's absolutely no way we will have time. But I also, somewhere in the back, I don't know if I'm just need to have something in the back of my brain that thinks we will, or I won't keep going, or I do think we're incredible. Even though I have a lot of anti-human thoughts, So I joke sometimes. People, racist. Yeah, I'm a racist. I have a real big problem with white people. I'm white. So I think that we sometimes we're tough to love. But if you think about what we can accomplish, it's just mind-boggling, like way more than the clam. So I do think we can do it if we all will decide to. And the best thing I ever heard, who was the guy who, I heard an interview with the guy who did V for Vendetta, the writer, and he was talking about it's kind of like the singularity for computers, where there's a time when they're going to just be able to think, there's a moment that's prophecy or, projected that's going to happen. He was talking about the research into how quickly we learn, and the learning was based on technology, like how quickly technology grows. And they've basically calculated it out, and now it's increasing at a rate of, like we're doubling every 18 months or something like that. And so his thought was, like, at some point we're all just going to go boom, and we're going to get it. We're going to have so much knowledge that we'll just all immediately just understand how to solve this simple problem. So that's my hope, is that something like that will happen, and all I can do until then is just, I enjoy this. I couldn't sit around and not do this. I can't imagine just accepting the status quo. How do you get up in the morning and go, yeah, it's all going to go up in flames, and I'm just going to go down, to McDonald's? I mean, I can't do that. I enjoy myself doing it this way, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. So I just, again, above my pay grade. I don't know if it's going to work, but that's up to all of us.
Right on, Clarke. I really want to thank you for being with us today. We've had a super cool conversation, and I really want to urge everyone to check out any of Clarke's excellent books, articles, and research. He's also mentioned his consulting services with Passive House as a consultant for these guys. Go to his website. It's clarkesnell.com, clarkesnell.com. You can find these links also on our show notes page with howtobuildgreen.com, along with other interesting tidbits from this interview. Signing off. Thank you.